My heart was pounding wildly as I stood at the edge of that pond, my 8-month pregnant belly heavy with the child I had dreamed of for so long. The argument with Jeremy had spiraled beyond control, his words filled with a rage I had never seen before in our 5 years of marriage. Before I could even speak, he lunged forward and pushed me, his anger unleashing a force that still haunts me to this day. I lost my balance, falling backward into the cold, dark water that seemed to swallow me whole. Panic seized my entire body as I desperately fought to breathe, feeling the weight of my unborn child pulling me deeper into the murky depths. My name is Aaliyah Jones, and I never imagined my life would unravel in such a devastating way. I was 30 years old then, a freelance photographer living in the suburbs of Chicago, 8 months pregnant with my first child. And the man who had just pushed me into that pond was my husband, Jeremy Jones. It hadn't always been like this, far from it. 5 years ago, Jeremy had seemed like everything I had ever dreamed of in a husband. He was an ambitious and charismatic real estate developer, with big plans for the future, the kind of man who seemed to have his whole life mapped out. I was drawn to his confidence, attracted to the way he always seemed to know exactly what he wanted. We married after just a year of dating, caught up in what I thought was a perfect love story. In those early days, our life together seemed absolutely perfect, like something out of a fairy tale. We bought a beautiful house in a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place where you could imagine raising a family. I built my photography business from home while Jeremy's career in real estate development flourished. We shared dreams of building a family together, and for years, that dream felt so close I could almost touch it. But then, slowly, things began to change, like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. The stress of work began taking its toll, and the charming, gentle man I had fallen in love with seemed to vanish before my eyes. His emotional outbursts became more frequent, and small disagreements escalated into full-blown arguments that left me shaking. He started blaming me for things beyond my control, like being late for work or problems around the house. I tried to defend myself, but his anger only grew more intense, like a fire that couldn't be contained. These explosive episodes became a regular part of my daily life, as routine as making morning coffee. I found myself constantly questioning whether I had done something wrong, walking on eggshells in my own home. His dissatisfaction even extended to our plans for a family, something we had both wanted so desperately at first. When I became pregnant, instead of joy, his attitude turned cold, like winter settling into our marriage. Jeremy started saying the pregnancy was interfering with our lives, words that cut deeper than any physical pain. Though his words wounded me deeply, I couldn't ignore the fact that this was how he felt. Still, I had this fierce, protective instinct toward the life growing inside me. Somewhere in my heart, I clung to the hope that we could return to those happy days we once shared, like an old photograph I couldn't bear to throw away. I made excuses for him, the market fluctuations affecting his business, the long hours leaving him exhausted, things beyond his control. When we first discovered I was pregnant, I truly believed it would be the beginning of a joyful new chapter in our lives. How wrong I was. As my pregnancy progressed, Jeremy's frustration grew like a shadow, darker and longer with each passing day. At first, he pretended to be excited, telling me starting a family would be wonderful, but I could feel the tension lurking behind his words. Every time he came home, I felt like I was walking on eggshells, waiting for the next explosion. He would come home late, his face tight with anger, refusing to talk about work, the baby, or anything at all. I tried everything I could to keep our life together, but nothing I said or did seemed to ease his mood. One night, I sat on the sofa, gently stroking my swollen belly, realizing just how far we had drifted apart. Jeremy sat on the opposite side of the room, staring at his phone, barely acknowledging my existence. I attempted to start a conversation, carefully asking him how his day at work had been. Without even looking up, he curtly responded that it was the same as always. I sighed, feeling that familiar ache of disappointment tightening in my chest. I know it's hard, Jeremy, I said softly, but we're getting through this together, and the baby will be here soon. He suddenly cut me off, finally looking at me, with irritation burning in his eyes. He asked if I really thought everything would magically get better when the baby arrived, saying things would only get worse. His harsh words left me speechless, my eyes wide with shock. Jeremy, I just want to help, I pleaded. We can get through this together. He jumped up suddenly, shouting that I wasn't helping at all, that I was only making things more difficult, and that he was already overwhelmed with work without me constantly reminding him about everything. His words cut deep into my heart, leaving me speechless and lost. I didn't know what to say or how to make things better anymore. The only thing I knew for certain was that this man standing before me was not the same person I had married. As time passed, the distance between us grew wider and wider, like an endless chasm. Jeremy barely acknowledged my pregnancy, and every conversation turned into an argument. I had hoped having a baby would bring us closer together, but instead, it was tearing us apart. The night Jeremy pushed me into the pond was the culmination of weeks of mounting tension. He came home late, frustration etched across his face, and I could tell he had been drinking from the unsteadiness in his movements. His eyes were sharp with anger, glinting dangerously in the dim light. I was sitting at the dining table, organizing baby clothes I had bought that day, when I looked up to see him enter the room. We need to talk, I said quietly, knowing we couldn't keep avoiding these conversations. About what? He slurred his words, his tone mocking and hostile. About how you've ruined my life, he spat, how you've dragged me into this mess. I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs. What are you talking about? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He threw his keys onto the table and glared at me with such intensity that I felt my blood run cold. It's everything, the baby, you, all of it. You've ruined everything, he raged. I can't even think straight anymore, because of you. Tears welled up in my eyes, but I fought to hold them back. Jeremy, I haven't ruined anything. This is our life, our baby, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. You need to calm down. Calm down, he spat, leaping to his feet. Why should I calm down? You don't have any pressure or stress. You just play around with your camera at home all day. While I'm out there killing myself, trying to support everything, he snarled. I stood up on trembling legs, feeling like a leaf in a storm. Jeremy, please. We need to talk about this. It's only going to get worse if we don't, I pleaded, but he wasn't listening anymore. Before I could process what was happening, he stormed past me and headed for the backyard. I followed him, driven by fear that twisted like a knife in my stomach. He stood by the pond, his silhouette dark against the night sky. Jeremy, I called out, breathless from following him. Please, let's go back inside and talk about this. My voice was shaking as I begged, but when he turned to look at me, his eyes were filled with a rage that made my blood run cold. You know what, Aaliyah? Maybe you need to see this clearly, he said, and in one swift motion, he pushed me. I don't remember much after hitting the water. Everything became a blur of cold and panic, like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. It was Mrs. Davis, our neighbor, who saved me by calling the police. Jeremy tried to minimize the incident, claiming I had slipped and he had only tried to help me. But I knew the truth. The look in his eyes before he pushed me was burned into my memory forever. At the hospital, the doctors examined both me and the baby. By some miracle, our child was unharmed, though the emotional damage done that night was immeasurable. Jeremy was arrested, and a restraining order was issued. That night, by the pond marked the symbolic end of our marriage. The days following the incident felt surreal, like I was walking through a fog. I had never imagined my life could fall apart like this, shattering like a dropped mirror. I had loved Jeremy, at least, I had loved the man I thought I knew. I thought I understood him, but that man was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize anymore. After being discharged from the hospital, I moved in with my sister Hannah. She had always been my rock, and the moment she heard what happened, she offered me a place to stay without hesitation. Her home became my sanctuary, a safe haven where I could heal and prepare for my baby's arrival. The legal proceedings were exhausting, draining every ounce of energy I had left. Jeremy's lawyers tried to paint me as an unfit mother, claiming my emotional state had caused the accident at the pond. But the evidence against him mounted steadily, like building blocks of truth. Mrs. Davis had witnessed everything that night, and her testimony, along with the restraining order, worked in my favor. After an exhausting legal battle, I was granted full custody of my child. Jeremy was ordered to attend therapy and anger management classes, and he was forbidden from contacting me or the baby without court permission. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again, finally free from the weight of Jeremy's anger. A few weeks later, I went into labor. It was an emotional day filled with fear and excitement, a storm of conflicting feelings. Hannah stayed by my side throughout, holding my hand through every contraction. After hours of labor, I gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. The moment I held her in my arms, I was overwhelmed by a fierce love and protective instinct that took my breath away. She was perfect in every way. I named her Lucy as a symbol of light and hope, because that's exactly what she was, a bright light piercing through the darkest chapter of my life. When I first held her, I realized just how much I had endured to get to this moment. All the pain, fear, and uncertainty seemed to fade away as I gazed at her tiny face. As I felt her little hand grip my finger, I knew this was the new beginning I had been waiting for. This was our fresh start, just the two of us. Hannah stayed with me during those first days of motherhood, helping with night feedings and diaper changes. Though I was exhausted, I felt a deep peace I hadn't experienced in a long time. I knew we were safe now, no more walking on eggshells, no more fear. Each day, watching her grow, I was reminded of the strength I had found within myself to escape that toxic situation and build a better future. As weeks passed, I slowly began rebuilding my life, piece by piece. I returned to my photography work, taking on small projects from home. The flexibility allowed me to care for her while working, helping me regain a sense of independence while focusing on being a mother. My clients were understanding, and gradually, my business began to grow again. But it wasn't just my work that needed rebuilding. I had to learn to trust myself again, to believe that I had made the right decisions. The trauma remained, but I refused to let it define me. I started attending therapy, learning how to overcome the pain and protect both myself and my daughter from the shadows of the past. There were days when the weight of being a single mother felt overwhelming, like trying to carry the world on my shoulders. But every time I looked at her smile, I knew I had made the right decision. She was my reason for everything, and I vowed to give her a life filled with love, stability, and happiness. Just as I was beginning to find my balance again, something happened. Several months had passed since the trial, and Jeremy had maintained his distance, attending his court-ordered therapy and anger management classes. But I wasn't ready to face him again. Then came that day at the daycare center. When I went to pick her up, I saw Jeremy standing across the street, watching us. My heart started racing, and every instinct told me to run. But I couldn't, not with her in my arms. I quickly turned away, got into my car, closed the door, and drove off. That night, I called my lawyer, desperate to know what options I had. Even though Jeremy hadn't violated the restraining order, his mere presence had shaken me to my core. I didn't want him anywhere near me or my daughter. The following week, Jeremy's lawyer contacted mine. He was requesting supervised visitation, and my heart sank at the news. After all my efforts to protect her from his volatile anger, now he wanted to be part of her life. Legally, he had that right, but emotionally, I wasn't ready to accept it. Jeremy's request for supervised visitation sent chills down my spine. I wasn't prepared to handle this situation, especially after everything I'd been through. The mere thought of him being near her made my stomach twist into knots. But the law was on his side. Despite what he had done, he was still her father, and the court was likely to grant him strictly supervised visits. My lawyer, Kelly, had handled cases like this before and understood how difficult this was. The thought of letting Jeremy back into our lives, even peripherally, was overwhelming. But she was realistic about it. In her gentle but firm voice, Kelly explained that while she understood how painful this was, the courts would likely give him a chance, especially since he had completed his anger management therapy. The fact that he hadn't violated the restraining order worked in his favor. She assured me we could fight for the strictest possible conditions, supervised visits in a neutral location, and I wouldn't have to be present. I sat in her office, my hands trembling in my lap, trying to process her words. The idea of Jeremy seeing her, even under supervision, made my skin crawl. But I understood that if I didn't cooperate, the court might view me as uncooperative, which could hurt my case later. I can't trust him, I whispered. What if he loses his temper again? What if he tries to hurt her? Kelly nodded sympathetically, explaining that's why we would insist on professional supervision. She assured me that he would never be alone with her, and if he crossed any lines, the visit would end immediately. It wasn't the reassurance I wanted, but it was the best option we had at the time. The first supervised visit was scheduled at a children's visitation center. It was a neutral, institutional space designed to ensure safety during these emotionally charged reunions. Of course, she was too young to understand what was happening. At 9 months old, she was just a happy, energetic baby, completely unaware of the tension surrounding her. I didn't attend the visit. I couldn't bear to see Jeremy, especially after everything that had happened. Instead, I waited anxiously at Hannah's house, pacing back and forth, checking my phone repeatedly for updates. After the visit, Kelly called to tell me everything had gone well. Jeremy had been cooperative, and the supervisor reported no issues. She had remained safe throughout. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. A mix of relief and frustration tightened in my chest. I hated having to share my daughter with the man who had tried to harm me. But at least for now, the visits were controlled. I told myself, she didn't need to know all the truth about her father, at least not yet. To her, he was just someone she saw occasionally, not someone who could cause harm. Still, I dreaded the day when she would grow older and start asking questions. Even as I struggled with the visitation process, I kept focusing on rebuilding my life. My photography business was doing better than ever, with new clients and projects coming in steadily. It gave me a sense of purpose and control, something I had lost during my time with Jeremy. I continued with therapy, working through the trauma of the past year. Dr. Samuel helped me unpack the emotional baggage I had been carrying. He taught me how to set boundaries and trust my instincts. I learned that while it was okay to be afraid, I didn't have to let that fear control me. My daughter's safety, her happiness, and her future, these were my priorities. Jeremy's presence loomed like a dark cloud on our horizon, but I refused to let it overshadow our progress. The supervised visits continued without incident. The court kept close watch on his behavior. Jeremy showed no signs of aggression during the visits, and the supervisor's reports were consistently positive. He was calm and cooperative, respecting all the set rules. Part of me felt relieved, but another part couldn't shake the fear that this peace was only temporary. I kept thinking about the real Jeremy, who had pushed me into that pond, wondering if he was still lurking beneath the surface. As time passed, Jeremy began making frequent requests for increased visitation time. He started pushing for longer visits and looser supervision requirements. His lawyers argued that he had demonstrated responsible fatherhood during supervised visits, and it was time to allow more contact. The very thought of him spending more time with her filled me with dread. Unsupervised visits were completely out of the question. Though I strongly advocated for maintaining supervision, the court began showing signs of favoring Jeremy's position. After all, there had been no incidents during visits, and he had met all court requirements. One afternoon, after another hearing, I found myself face to face with Jeremy for the first time since that night at the pond. He approached me as I was leaving the courthouse, his expression unreadable. "Aaliyah," he called out, and I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't want to talk to him, but something in his voice made me hesitate. "I just want to apologize," he said quietly. "I know I ruined everything. I know I hurt you. But I'm trying to get better, for our daughter's sake and for mine." I stared at him, emotions swirling like a storm inside me. I wanted to be angry, an apology wasn't enough, not after what he'd done. Yet some small part of me, the part that had once loved him, felt a flicker of sympathy. "Your apology means nothing," I said, my voice cold but firm. "What you did can't be erased with an apology. My only concern is keeping my daughter safe. I'll do whatever it takes to protect that. And maybe, just maybe, you'll have a chance to be part of her life." He nodded, lowering his eyes, and said he understood, and promised to try. Eventually, the court granted Jeremy longer supervised visits. But I never let my guard down, I understood the risks too well. My focus remained on her, and the future we were building together. A future free from fear, filled with love and hope. In the end, I learned that strength isn't always about winning every battle. Sometimes it's about having the courage to step back to protect what matters most. Watching her bright eyes and innocent smile, I knew I had made the right decisions. This was our new chapter. A chapter filled with growth, resilience, and unshakable love.